This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning.
Morning. Kelly Reed, Kimberly here. Leanne Llewellyn here. Jan Allen. Aaron Brown.
Here.
Dylan Burnett. Santino Provenzano. Aubrey Bushert. Daisy Day. Ben Elishewski.
Here.
Bob McConnell. Rajesh Brandon.
Here.
Chris Cooley.
Here.
David Witzberg.
Here online.
Dan Fitzpatrick. Scott Browning. Randy DeShazo for Sean Sullivan.
Yes.
Brandon Miller. Juanita Bernal Leon. Sarah Kessler. Here. Viviana Van Dixon. Here. Chris Pratt.
Here.
Felicia Burks.
Here, online.
Chair, we do have a quorum. And Juanita is on.
Thank you. All right. So I don't believe you have any changes to the agenda.
Nope.
So the second item is approval from the minutes of May 20th, 2022 management board meeting. Motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed. All right. Do you have any citizens here today that want to speak or online? So the next item is our quarterly financial report.
If you go to page 10 in the packet, this represents our quarterly financial report for the third quarter through June 30th of the current fiscal year 2022. Basically, what to report here for Q3 is we're a little bit behind in terms of revenue and total expenses from what we anticipated during the mid-year budget amendment, but overall, we're below many of our expense categories in terms of that 75% level. You're a little bit behind in terms of revenues and expenses just because of the project delays. A lot of those projects will probably be pushed into the new fiscal year. But overall, nothing too anomalous to present to the board. I'll be happy to answer any questions in terms of particular expense revenue items. This is where our quarterly stands at this point. About 2.4 million in total revenues to date, and about 1.9 in expenses.
All right, this is an action item.
Yep.
Okay. I'm like, hey, we're not. Okay. So, is there a motion to accept the financial report?
Nope.
Is there a second? Second. Any additional discussion or questions for Ed? Seeing none, or hearing none online, all those in favor of accepting the quarterly financial report, aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, Ed, our initial FY23 program budget.
Moving on to our plans for fiscal year 2023, which would start October 1 next year. Whole range of our budget is expressed on page 12 of the packets. So, working through what we are projecting for the next fiscal year, we're expecting about 3.6 million in total revenues, about 3.4 million in total expenses. Things to point out in terms of revenues, we're expecting, about 3.49 million in revenues and 3.5 million in expenses. Things to point out in terms of next year's proposed revenues, we are probably going to receive a little bit more proportional share of federal dollars just because of our increase in grant funds to the EPA, as well as new bipartisan infrastructure law funding, and probably closing out some store projects by next year. So we'll see a little bit more expenses, I have, as indicated, at the last board meeting, we've started making projections to bring on additional staff, hiring 2 staff, actually this fiscal year, planning on hiring 1 additional staff next fiscal year. So the personnel cost, 16.2% increase from the prior fiscal year represents those additional staff cost adjustments for our existing staff. The other thing to mention, we're bringing most of our expenses like travel back up to pre-pandemic levels. So you see some increases there. We're expecting to attend several conferences as part of explaining our science policy, both within the region and outside the region. And other increases in terms of our expenditures related to just inflationary cost increases related to our insurance, our cost of rent increases for office space. The one notable increase that says 280% is for capital outlays. We're planning on purchasing some office furniture to accommodate those new staff members as well as computers. So we're anticipating some expenses in terms of our capital outlays. Some of those costs we might incur prior to the start of fiscal year 2023. So we passed the final budget for the current fiscal year in November. A little bit higher in terms of capital outlays. Get that equipment on board as we operate. Other than that, I'd be happy to address any questions that you have on the initial program-wide budget for year 2023. So they're properly noticed. Camp Day time this past Wednesday. We'll be advertising again this Sunday. We'll go to a public hearing and alcohol support meeting next Friday for that question might have initial program.
Better the project.
No, I'm just, from the current year, there's a lot, no.
Yeah.
Unspent, and you expect that way, usually next year, but those in that starting figure. The same.
Yeah, we're still projecting high expenses in terms of tech support and contracts. So whatever work doesn't get done this fiscal year, we'll roll over into the next fiscal year. Right now, just for the terms of some of our contracts, we're expecting those levels. Some of that will encompass what's not completed this fiscal year. So when we come back in our initial budget, we'll probably, our final budget for the current fiscal year, we're probably going to lower our tech contract. Unless we receive word that projects are complete by September 15th.
Additional questions for that? All right, this is also an action item. So we have a motion to accept the initial FY 23 program wide budget. Second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes. All right, next item on the agenda, Planet First Bank signature resolution.
It's on page 13 of your agenda, and there's also a link to the actual resolution. This is basically a follow-up to us establishing new bank accounts through Planet First Bank. Established 3 at this point and are starting to make the transition of our financial resources from Truist to Planet First Bank. We have not started paying any expenditure from these bank accounts yet. So this resolution would authorize our accounting service providers to Harwich and LLC to be designated signature on our accounts and actually start cutting checks. And that would be authorizing Daniel Shuey and Catherine Todd, who currently have authorization through our Truist accounts to write checks from these Planet First Bank. Be happy to entertain any questions on that. There are any.
I don't know.
There's coffee over there.
All right, so behalf of change over to climate first aid. Have a motion. Any additional discussion on this item? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. All in favor? Yes, we're good. Okay, the next item is, Pinellas County Flow Monitoring Agreement.
Moving on to agenda item 7, which is on page 14. We have been supporting hydrologic monitoring into Pinellas County creeks through our work plan for the past decade. This new agreement with Pinellas County is actually going to exceed my authorization authority through the street program to sign on to the agreement with the county. We're bringing this to you all today for that authorization. The anticipated 3-year contract for fiscal year 2023, fiscal year 2025 equates to about $27,492. My authority is at $25,000 below this. That's what we're bringing. This helps support implementation of TMDLs and other event compliance efforts in the Pinellas County. Team needs to understand hydrologic and loading conditions from priority Title 3 basins, Allen Street, and Jewel Street. I'd be happy to entertain questions if you have any questions on this project. Yes.
So back I did here when the agreement originally went for special meeting, it looks like there's been a board permit. So is this a requirement for the county to do JT that wasn't helping funded for this? It's not a requirement. It's not a requirement. No, it's again to calculate loadings. I mean, we use it to help, and we can just use a model. EMC models and calculate loads, but this is more about understanding the actual loads going into going into some water focusing things.
So these projects have been a component of annual work plan. We've been supporting monitoring these creeks for some time because it does support research priority of the SRE program, CCMP, to better understand loadings from unengaged basins. Basically, those basins that are pretty close to the priority case segments. Like the Pac Bay. So it helps support implement the CCMP.
All right, we have a motion to authorize the executive director to enter into the agreement with Pinellas County in the amount of $27,492.
That would recommend the policy board.
Recommend policy. Second.
Second.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Dave, you're just behind us.
Sorry about that.
No? That motion passes. And then there's a second part of that. Recommends the policy board to authorize the executive director to amend the scope of budget.
Yeah, this is basically an add-on that we usually have as part of these contract agreements. So if there are additional costs incurred under this contract, we had to incur some fair costs, what industry program. It's authorizing to amend the scope and budget of that existing contract up to my approval authority of $25,000.
Any questions for Ed on that provision? We have a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? senior management service class board is.
Moving on to agenda item 8, which is on page 15 of your packets. This is, I'm bringing this to the board's attention, namely in terms of recognizing a lot of outstanding effort from our assistant director, Ms. Maya Berg. In the past, the board has authorized both my position and the program administrator position to be classified as a senior management service class or retirement system. Since retirement of the program administrator back in November, we've been reorganizing the organization, but Maya Berg has been taking over a lot of those program administrative duties. And it will be administering our human resources and a lot of the activities that Ron did for our program. As such, I think it's appropriate to recognize the great work she does, both on the administrative side and collectively throughout the region on science and policy issues that we're facing in terms of starting protecting Tampa Bay. She's been an outstanding employee that deserves well-deserved recognition of the senior management service class. So my recommendation is to have the policy board approve senior management service class for the Tampa Bay program system director. Recommend that the policy board authorize me to submit an application to designate assistant director Maya Berg to that senior management service class in the Florida retirement system. Be happy to entertain any questions that you might have on this, but as I mentioned, I think it's a well-deserved recognition of her efforts and the position that she wants to take.
No questions, but I just want to reiterate, part of any part of the program, will make it out of my experience to go to work.
I mentioned that was the motion. We need to vote.
We did not. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, both motions can be passed. All right, executive director and staff reports.
There's several items to bring to the board's attention. I did want to mention, we have just received an estimate for our current fiscal year's audit from our longstanding auditor. And it's now exceeding my approval authority. So I am planning to bring this topic up for discussion at the policy board meeting next Friday. We're currently and actively seeking additional quotes for this year's audit from other appropriate auditing firms throughout the region. And I'm hoping to get an idea of how cost effective the current quote we have from our current service provider is. Again, I just want to bring this to the management board's attention. If there's any particular recommendations or comment from this management board that you would like me to pass on to the policy board in terms of our auditing service provider services. Right now, I've only budgeted $20,900 for those services. And the quote we've got is fairly substantially higher than that and above my approval target of $25,000. So that's why we're receiving quotes right now. I'm hoping to keep the auditing cost for this current fiscal year below that $25,000 level, but we'll see what that quotes are from other appropriate auditing firms. Yes.
Not related to the audit, but just 25,000, given what the costs are increasing, have you thought of, or I don't know what the process is, but thought about asking for your approval ability to be higher than 25,000, like 30,000 something? I don't know how often that happens, or how often you get close to something.
Yeah, right now it aligns with the state purchasing requirements. So between 25,000 and 35,000 is sort of in limbo period. Above 35,000, we have to go out for sealed bids. Right now, I think we're probably going to receive quotes between that $25,000 to $35,000 levels. That's why we're bringing it to the board's attention, and we'll see what the policy board's direction is based on So as an independent special district of the state, I think it'd be difficult for us to amend that $25,000 authorization for me. Other items, just to bring to the board's attention, we actually are set to receive $25,000 in additional funding for our next fiscal year 2023 work plan. We're actually contacted by EPA after we formally submitted the work plan that was adopted at last May's management policy board meetings. The work that is envisioned under these additional funds will help support better refinement of restoration opportunities, particularly in more urbanized portions of the watershed that we use the district's land use plan cover information to identify non-restorable and restorable lands throughout the watershed. So we'll be using NOAA CCAP data, which is a national level land use land cover data set at 1 meter resolution to better refine our restoration opportunity identification within the watershed. So we'll be merging basically the district land use land cover information, these NOAA CCAP data. Just bringing this to the board's attention because it's adding on to the federal appropriations that we received for this coming fiscal year of $750,000, raising that to $775,000 for next year's work plan. We'll be matching those additional funds with the in-kind project that was proposed by Pinellas County. So we're able to support those matching federal appropriations with that in-kind project. Are there any questions on that or concerns? I did also want to mention there are two appropriation bills that have been approved through the Senate and the House. I think both branches of the Congress are actually going through reconciliation now for final federal appropriations that will affect our fiscal year 2024 work plan levels. But as it stands right now, the appropriation set about 800,000 in federal funding to the National History Programs, the 28 National History Programs, for potentially our next fiscal year. So I mentioned the Congress is going through the budget reconciliation process, so we hope those figures last through that reconciliation process. But optimistically, we're hoping to get some additional federal support for the next fiscal year. On a related note, we did receive some final guidance from EPA on the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that we are actually have already received this current fiscal year and are set to receive for the following 4 fiscal years. This was a component of the work plan that we developed and was approved at last May meetings. There's 2 restoration themes and some preliminary projects that we identified for use of these funds, namely to help support tidal creek habitat restoration throughout the watershed, as well as support aging infrastructure issues that many of our municipalities are faced with. So we are continuing to be in contact with each municipal government to further round out the project concepts that we will submit as part of now receiving this EPA guidance for that federal funding. We're anticipating submitting the proposal by October 24th, which is the due date, based on this guidance for the first 2 years of that bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So that $1.8 million available bipartisan infrastructure law funding to support those 2 restoration concepts. So as I mentioned, we will be in contact with partners who we've been in discussions about those initial project concepts to get additional detail from the round out the proposal to EPA. As part of the guidance that we received from EPA, there's additional long-term planning that we need to develop, which includes an equity strategy for the use of those funds, primarily the last 3 years, fiscal years 24, 25, and 26, for the use of the remaining 3 years of those bipartisan infrastructure law money. That long-term plan and equity strategy is due to EPA next June, and that will allow additional match waivers to occur for the use of those funds. Right now, the first 2 years, there's an existing match waiver, so we don't have to match the federal projects that have any questions on that issue, question at the May meeting, but as I mentioned, we will be in contact with each of the partners. We'll have a draft proposal for comment prior to the full submission to EPA for the first 2 years by October 24th of this year. Questions on that? Yep,
Because I'm chatting when I'm talking about.
absolutely.
Does the defining the disadvantage community is still a quick one? It's pretty comprehensive, maybe is a good word for it. Is there a strategy that you guys are looking at utilizing to identify these areas?
Yeah, as part of the guidance, the EPA is actually proposing the use of a supplemental demographic index to identify underserved, disadvantaged communities throughout the nation. There's been a lot of disagreement amongst the entities about representativeness of that supplemental demographic index, but they've also provided an opportunity in the guidance for each NEP to advocate for their own development of identification of underserved communities. Maya's been reaching out to planning commissions, and there's already active work from planning commissions to identify within our communities vulnerable communities that are underserved. We'll probably be using some sort of hybrid, looking at the national level information as well as our local level information to come up with our recommended approach to addressing projects within the underserved communities. And there's allowance for that in EPA guidance that was issued.
It'd be helpful if they would try to find some consistency. I'm just saying, like, we just had to go through the same exact thing with ARPA. And, you know, getting the Treasury put out all this guidance on what criteria you must use for that. So if EPA then comes up with their own criteria and those types of things don't align, then it just, you know, it's like, okay, well, ARPA, we're, using this as a, their criteria. EPA comes up with something different. Sometimes they don't align. And so if you're trying to match funding and the projects don't agree that on the disadvantaged community part,
Yeah,
I don't know what he's
you're not alone in that sentiment. It's pretty much, universally what I'm hearing from the entities that have put together some sort of equity plan already. And so there's appetite for like a regional working group to kind of get together and agree on what those criteria are here. And then I think, and Ed can add on to this, but the conversations at the federal level and with all of the other entities have been kind of drawn out. And, in the end, I think our strategy has always been, let's speak with one collective voice as a region, and if it's defensible, the federal government will accept it. But in terms of changing that federal guidance, it seems like that will be a heavier lift. So I'm not sure we'll be successful getting them consistent, but we could get ourselves consistent as a region. Because as it stands right now, for example, the thresholds that Pinellas County is using in their equity plans are not consistent with the thresholds that Hillsborough County is using in their equity plans. And, we haven't had those conversations to determine if there's reasons for that that make sense, or if it's just this is how we did it and, whatever.
Yeah, right now, the EPA guidance is using the EPA screening tool by indicators and develop the supplemental demographic index. It's based on percent low income, percent linguistically isolated, percent less than high school education, percent employed, and low life expectancy thresholds on the census tract level. And nationally, they're saying that get an 80 percentile threshold to those categories. So if any one of those categories is below those thresholds, when you take an average, it's hard to meet that 80% across those 5 metrics. That's been a lot of the argument of the NEPs. You're looking at census tract data in each of the NEPs throughout the nation. There's very few census tracts that meet that criteria. My initiative, we think there's more regionally appropriate ways that we can come up with identifying underserved communities within our region that makes sense to dedicate these resources. next item, just to bring to the board's attention, this is a follow-up mainly from the May policy board discussion. There was a request to start considering looking at a regional stormwater control and implementation project and submit the project concept to the Deepwater Horizon portal for consideration of additional resource fund resources to help support that project concept. Based on that feedback, we actually did submit a project concept into the portal by the due date in early July. I've had subsequent conversations with DEP just to further explain what the project concept is. It's my understanding that they view this as a qualified project that would be available for this funding source. They're planning on making a decision on that funding by September of this year. So I'm hopeful that we'll receive some positive feedback in terms of support for that project. And this project concept was broken down into two potential phases. The first phase was looking at developing a multi-jurisdictional stormwater management plan for the whole Tampa Bay watershed. This is an area where we have struggled meeting water quality criteria. And we've done some modeling indicating that we achieve 25% load reduction from non-polluting sources that might have the benefit of water quality conditions forward. The issue is where do we do projects that achieve that 25% load reduction in total nitrogen? And that's what this first phase of the project is hoping to address. And then the second phase, which is the bulk of ask for resources to restore fund to the 12 venue, is that we would start actually implementing some of those projects that have already been identified by some of the municipal governments throughout the region, and specifically targeting sort of these stormwater issues that we have in some segments. So as I mentioned, we submitted that project concept to the DEP portal in early July. They explained to me that they're going to be going through the review process of the next couple of months, but they're expecting that they'll have some decisions for that funding source in September this year. So I'm hoping to report back at the next board meetings and positive news at the front of additional resources that will help us implement activities that will have beneficial effect on reducing stormwater in Tampa Bay. Any questions on that one? Last thing to mention, and I mentioned this during the budget updates, we have extended offers to restoration ecologists and administrative specialists that we're hoping to bring on board for the end of this current fiscal year. We're trying to get some start dates patched out for each of those candidates, but right now we are anticipating bringing on those two staff members this fiscal year. Within the next year's budget, I've also programmed in funding to help support social research scientists. This was explained during the development of our annual work plan. This is a position that would complement a lot of activities to interface with the community, develop social marketing research or other social research that would benefit behavior change initiatives within the estuary and support implementation of the CCUP. So those three positions into the next fiscal year will bring our staffing to about 9. I would have that as sort of the max that we would hopefully maintain for the long term based on all the revenue that is coming into the program and the active projects that we're administering. That level, I think, is appropriate to start getting some really good work done, resources out for. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that staffing plan. But as it stands right now, that's where we're at. Okay, the last topic, and it's not as part of the topic, but not part of the packet, just to bring to the board's attention. I've been in active discussions with the receiver at Piney Point, and with the county in terms of their planned activities to the course of this rainy season. Back in around July 4th time period, it brought to our attention that there might be some stormwater discharges from the site to help alleviate one of the cells that is now accumulating stormwater so that they can actually close the facility. So this is old gypstack south cell that is now collecting stormwater. there was some initial sampling conducted in July, and then another round of sampling that occurred last week, and I've heard some results from that last week's sampling that indicates the nutrient concentrations are much lower than was expected from the first round of the sampling. So the facility itself does have a stormwater allocation and allow permitted discharge of the nitrogen consortium and the DEP. The initial reports of some of the nutrient concentrations were a little bit concerning, but with this latest rounds of sampling, I think they'll be well below what their allowable discharge would be from the site into Tampa Bay. But they are proposing to convey that water to the decant line that they used during the original emergency discharge. That discharge would go directly out to Port Manatee. So there will be a load into lower Tampa Bay. Certainly know that the bay is not at its healthiest or prime condition right now. We do see a lot of active macroalgae growth along a lot of our seagrass beds. So any additional loads in the bay is concerning for sure, but this is part of their permitted stormwater discharge authority. So as I get more information on this, I'll relay that to the board, and we have actually had some stat out collecting some initial macroalgae and seagrass data this past week to understand baseline conditions and moving forward as the discharge might occur. We'll continue that monitoring and know that any water quality monitoring that is being conducted by all the counties throughout the region will be used to sort of establish any potential impacts to nutrient conditions in the following along in terms of waterway conditions. But I don't anticipate this discharge to have a profound effect on the bay's current condition. But as I mentioned, the current condition of the bay is not great right now. Water quality wise, we're hoping that it will not have any impact in terms of water clarity or away the remainder of this wet season. But this is something I just want to bring to the board's attention. If there's additional discussion or anything you would like me to pass on to the policy board, this will be something I bring up during my executive director reports at the policy board meetings as well. I'm happy to hear those. Scott, I know the county's been out there sampling this past week. Want to add anything to what I just mentioned?
Not too much. I mean, we are continuing to sample around issues. That's not. It's just encourages us to. But yeah, it's a small structure.
Just to add on to what he said, the receivers anticipating bringing on a contractor to help close out the cells that currently contain about 14.5 million gallons of stormwater that they're looking to discharge. But discharge would probably happen over about 10 to 12 day period to relieve itself the existing stormwater that's collecting. And at the current nutrient concentrations, we're talking probably about hundreds of pounds of TN. Their allocation for a year, 1,800 pounds. So they'll be well below the allocated load. But there are still more pregnancies that they have intended with as a site operator. Continue maintaining loadings to the bay below that. Any other questions, concerns on that? Anything you would like me to relate to the policy board? Policy board. The loading. Yeah, this is not official results yet, but these are my calculations. Little calculations. It'd be hundreds of pounds, anywhere from like 200 to 500 pounds, depending on the final nutrient concentrations from split sampling that occurred last week. Their total allocation on a 5-year rolling annual average basis is 1,800.9. I think that was my reports. On behalf of Sheila Sclera, I just want to mention that we're currently listing proposals for the paving grant program. Those proposals are due mid-September, September 16th. Thank you. If you know community group within your municipalities, within the region that would benefit from these additional community funds to carry out projects that help protect, restore, and educate citizens on the importance of Tampa Bay, please have them look at that paving grant solicitation for those funds. And typically, fund projects up to about $5,000 level. I think that was all for director and staff reports. I will have other staff do the presentation shortly.
All right, Aaron, can you give an update on the technical advisory committee?
Thank you, Kelly. So if you turn to page 18 in your packet, you'll see the technical advisory committee report from May through July. 3 technical reports were published within this time frame, including from Luther and Myers designing a genetic algorithm selection of causeway cutters in Tampa Bay. Also, Freshie, Oskovich, and Zontech use of Staphylococcus aureus and MRSA indicator of human pollution in the bay. And Johansson, the optical model evaluation of recent underwater lake climate in northern segment of Tampa Bay. Those are all available online currently. We have 5 open science products that are currently available. Tampa Bay Method Index was last updated to include results from 2020. Also updates to the nitrogen loading data visualization. See that the color schemes for the report cards are standardized in order to be ready for the state today. The dashboard server was mitigated to do things that I'm sure Marcus can tell us all about that I don't fully understand. I don't know Mark to this day. 2 presentations were provided, one on the state of the bay, the water quality and seagrass update at the DW RA technical meeting, and Pipe Up from the USF Social Marketing Conference. Ongoing field work is occurring for both the seagrass transects and the Color Star campaign, also the shark status and trends monitoring. The Felipe Park Living Shoreline material preparation occurred at the end of June. Ongoing hard bottom monitoring and educational kayak tours also occurred in July. There were 4 committee meetings within our last time frame, including the Nitrogen Management Consortium on June 2nd, the Habitat Restoration Consortium on the 6th. Our Technical Advisory Committee was on the 15th. Southwest Florida Regional Ambient Monitoring Program on the 13th of July, and then the Open Science Subcommittee just occurred on the 2nd, and links to all of those committees are available there in the agenda. Anyone have any questions on that?
We have had a request. I'm sitting on a technical advisory committee for MOE. It's related to the funding they received for red tide technologies, if you will. And the group that I was asked to sit on their TAC project about it was Hope, and they have asked to present their project and data to the TAC at the October meeting. So hope we get a good audience there. I think they do have relocations in Tampa Bay that they will be proposing to do actual. They've done studies in microcosms in the laboratory. They will be proposing the next step would be to, have field demonstrations. All 3 of them are in Tampa Bay. So hopefully we can get a good turnout at that meeting and make sure that everybody gets the questions and that their science and tests.
And then if any of you have additional projects or work that you'd like to share with the TAC, I would welcome those suggestions either for the October meeting or otherwise. It's much better if I'm not generating all the topics on there. So I appreciate that Kelly's bringing this and the same invitation goes to all of you. Please share your work. That's the time.
Any additional discussion from the staff?
The next Habitat Restoration consortium meeting is August 31st. So I just wanted to
righty. So next is the community advisory committee report.
Yep, I'll be delivering that on behalf of Jan Allen and Dylan Meadows. So we did have one CAC meeting in June, the topics of which included CAC roles and responsibilities, some of the bylaw revisions, and we had a presentation from the Golden Forest Recreation Center, Rain Garden, Bay Mini Grant, just highlighting some of their work. 11 CAC members were there for that, and or rather 11 CAC members volunteered 30 hours period reported. We had many presentations, many of which including the state of the Bay, and also the history of nutrients, Tampa Bay. Building on a lot of the work that TVP's been doing, there's been 10 media interviews involving TVP staff. 7 events occurred in the past reporting period, mainly the Memorial Fishing Tournament was one of them, World Ocean Day fundraisers, and other presentation opportunities, including the Brazilian and Tampa Bay Symposium. We also had Activa Days, and some of our partners who attended some of their work, including Team Nels Bebot cleanup series, which is an interesting new debris device. As Ed mentioned, the Bay Mini Grants are due September 16th, so we've been promoting that. 1 Bay Mini Grant was completed this past period, and 24 Bay Mini Grants are ongoing. We've also had some communications products that have come to completion, including a hard bottom animation summary available on the website and YouTube channel, Trash Free Waters webpage, which is in draft stage right now, but working on releasing within the coming weeks. We invested in some advertising for eFloridian through billboards, digital billboards to be specific. Building some more digital assets to support the tarpon tag. This is an emblem that we're putting on a lot of the ads that we've been using to both Bay Mini Grants this season. Then, of course, the State of the Bay, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then a library of all of the news articles that TVP had involved. And then available in this report is the Reach Index, which is something that we continue to try to deliver on, which includes just the metrics for all our social media, news interviews, website, and analytics that we track, look at to try to improve on our communications efforts. So that.
All right, any questions on that report? All right, no additional discussion on that. Then mine is going to bring project highlight on National Science Foundation's funded Blue Green Algae Action Plan.
Not blue green algae.
Sorry, my bad.
So I just wanted to share with you all a little bit of work that I've been doing both here locally with partners at USF as well as partners in the U.S. Virgin Islands and actually the state of Iowa. So we put together this proposal for the Blue Green Action Platform, which was initially conceived of as a sort of technological solution to sharing information about nitrogen data. But I'm going to tell you the little story of how the project has evolved. So this project was proposed to NSF as part of their Convergence Accelerator program. And some of the core tenets of that Convergence Accelerator program are they are really supporting projects that take a serious multidisciplinary approach. They want people to be tackling problems that have significant societal impact. They're looking for things like cross-cutting partnerships. Anyone who was selected to take part in this Convergence Accelerator program had to go through their innovation curriculum, which is about user-inspired research, teamwork and interdisciplinary collaboration, team science, and a variety of other topics. So it was over like an 8-month period where we were going to weekly courses participating in these curriculum events. And then it has a co-opetition kind of feel to it. So it's a little bit like Shark Tank for nerds. So everybody has to you have to learn how to pitch your science, basically make it accessible. And they're also working with these teams to help see what can be monetized by private sector or other funding sources. And then they also are supporting further collaboration between what they call track alignment. So they basically are soliciting proposals in different categories or themes. And our proposal was based on a theme of the networked blue economy. So we interacted with a variety of teams throughout the world who are also working on things that are related somehow to oceans and the blue economy, whether that's people that are looking at recycling glass to address sand shortages, people that are looking at things like kelp farming. Like there was a whole gamut of solutions that we were sort of dealing with these other folks who were working in the network blue economy theme. But as you know, at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, our bread and butter is nitrogen pollution, and that's really the issue that we were trying to tackle through this, through our proposal. And our hook, the reason we wanted to work on nitrogen pollution is essentially because it's one of the most significant threats to the blue economy. It costs the U.S. About $210 billion per year. And so that's really the thrust of the work that we were trying to do. The team that we put together is in fact interdisciplinary. So you can see the co-PIs at the top. You have me, Dr. David Swartney from the University of Iowa, Dr. Maya Trotz from USF, Dr. Becky Zarger from USF, and then Dr. Tiara Moore from Black and Marine Science. So we have NGOs, universities, and government entities that are all participating in this group, and truly expertise from engineering to science, to policy, to anthropology, the sort of full gamut. So the idea is if you put these people together in a room, what are the different solutions and how can we sort of converge on something that's maybe a new and different approach to tackling nitrogen pollution. And our focal areas were really 3 watersheds. You had to be able to work at minimum a continental scale. So we couldn't only do work in the Tampa Bay watershed. So we're basically looking at piloting our work in three different size watersheds. A very small watershed, the Salt River watershed in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, our watershed here in Tampa Bay, and then something like really big and significant like the Mississippi, all with some sort of connection to the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. So through this, we basically used each of these locations as a living laboratory to work through the process of user-inspired research that NSF was teaching us through their curriculum. So we were able to, for example, I took folks on tours here in the Tampa Bay watershed to the Suncoast Youth Conservation Center that FWC runs over in Apollo Beach, and we could see how they interact with the community to educate people about water quality and habitat restoration projects. We also toured a farms project that the Southwest Florida Water Management District funded to look at a tailwater recovery system that helps to improve both water quantity challenges and water quality challenges in the over in Hillsborough County. And we also went out to MacDill Air Force Base to look at some of the living shoreline solutions that they've implemented on the Hillsborough Bay side of the base. And then Chris was kind enough to take us out on a tour of Port Tampa Bay and the facilities there. And through that process, we were able to conduct interviews and learn more about how people understood or didn't understand nitrogen pollution, what their concerns in connection to the blue economy is here in Tampa Bay. We then conducted kind of similar work in the Virgin Islands and in Iowa, and we're able to sort of connect some threads and some stories from each of those places. So one of the big things that we learned from talking to a variety of different folks in all of these places is that one of the biggest data themes that we heard was that we know that we have nitrogen reduction strategies, and we have in Iowa, for example, they have really thorough water quality monitoring stations, continuous water quality monitoring network that's all visualized, open, and available to folks on the internet. But it doesn't tell you anything about the sources of that nutrient pollution. Whereas here in Tampa Bay, we do a lot of work trying to estimate the sources of the nutrient load, and that's a big part of what we communicate to folks is that the sources of the nutrient pollution, and what that does is it helps us better tackle the kinds of activities and actions that we can take collectively as a community to address those nutrient loads to the bay. And so that need to connect both the real-time water quality monitoring to source information for nitrogen pollution was one of the main needs that was identified. In Iowa, as you can imagine, agriculture is a big part of their economy, and while it is the most significant contributor to nitrogen loading to their waterways, Many times their conversations are sort of shunted to dealing with like urban stormwater runoff and urban sorts of pollution sources, which is interesting because here in our area, as a predominantly urbanized watershed, a lot of times we hear people talking about agricultural sources of pollution when we know that our most significant source of nutrient pollution is actually from our stormwater. So we kind of talked about some of the parallels there, the different ways that nutrient pollution plays out in different watersheds, but the things that are sort of transferable from watershed to watershed. And then there were in terms of like the things that pulled on people's heartstrings and were really compelling for folks. There were two storytelling themes that came out pretty strongly for us, and that were stories that were related to both the economy and to human health. So for the economy, we had long conversations with the farmers and SwiftMud staff out at the farm site about how, yes, it's really important to be able to show that there's a return on the investment for the farmer to do the right thing. But even then, it can sometimes be challenging to get folks to take advantage of some of those financial incentives that maybe like flip the script and make something cost beneficial for their operation. So we talked a lot about those kinds of issues and the different incentives that are in place. And then we talked a lot about health. Folks that we interviewed around the Tampa Bay watershed, this was all occurring on the tails of the red tide event with all of the workers that were out there collecting the dead fish. And so there was significant concerns about exposure to neurotoxins and harmful algal blooms. And then in Iowa, actually, there was a lot of the conversations really changed a lot about concerns about the safety of their drinking water. Because there is significant, particularly among those that are on private wells, if their wells are very shallow and they are in agricultural areas, the nitrate levels in their wells can be really high. And we learned that it's something that's sort of a taboo topic there, that people won't like volunteer to talk about that information. It's something that they're very concerned about and they're open about when it comes to if there's like a new baby entering the family and what water sources they used for their children. But then they don't do anything to actually address the security and safety of that water supply once the child grows up or if there's not a child in the home. But people really, that was like a thing that was a turning point for a lot of people and something that they were very interested in hearing more about. So it's not just algae blooms, but it's also something that has a connection to me as an individual and my health. And then what we try to do is basically capture all of this work and the different interrelationships that we were hearing both from the literature, from our expert knowledge, and from what the community interviews were teaching us to try and model the system of how nutrient pollution works and what the different feedback loops are. So I know this is kind of convoluted, but basically what this gives you is a theory of change of how what levers you can pull to affect nutrient pollution overall. And so there are a couple of key levers that we ended up moving toward that was not where we started in our conversation. And those had to do about basically connecting community champions, people who have some kind of knowledge and exposure to nitrogen pollution and are able to speak about it in ways that are relatable and compelling. This is something that came out in our meetings in the U.S. Virgin Islands about how these nitrogen champions, people who are able to make this information really accessible through like social media channels, how much they were able to like build a constituency of people who are engaged and working for change in Salt River. And then we were able to basically retrospectively look back and say, well, that was really formative for things like the Tampa Bay story as well. We think about the people who lived on Bayshore in the 1960s, 70s, and were unhappy with the conditions that they were experiencing and how they then leverage their influence in order to implement different policy changes that the state legislature supported. And we saw similar kinds of things in Iowa as well. That in order for people to trust the data, it needed to come from trusted sources. And there's different audiences trust different information sources. So some audiences really trusted government sources of information, but others put more weight on like peer-to-peer data sharing. And so ways that you could sort of provide trusted information through different trusted messengers is something that can be really effective, we think. And basically how you can use all of this information to sort of like build up and generate demand for whatever policy solution makes sense for a different region. So that's sort of what the systems modeling component was trying to do. And so what does that mean? Well, for this grant proposal, in addition to like doing the user-inspired research and going through this core curriculum, we basically had to put together then a low fidelity prototype of how we would accomplish, how we would take the things that we learned and make them something real in the world. And like I said, we started off thinking it was going to be just a simple technology solution. But we realized pretty quickly that if you just build an app, doesn't mean anybody's necessarily going to understand it, go to it, use it, or that it would have like any sort of meaningful life that would result in anything other than people doing the same as what they always are. And so this idea of pairing data with stories, compelling stories from champions and influential folks in the community in ways that are sort of tugging on these different leverage points that we have identified in the interviews in order to let people self-determine actions that address nutrient pollution in their respective places that they act is sort of what we're trying to put together. So this is that low fidelity prototype. We have several versions, but you'll see here what we're talking about pulling together is basically something where you can use artificial intelligence to use plain language to ask questions about water quality. You can type in your address and find out what nitrogen data is available in your area. You can connect with people that have sort of an experience related to nitrogen and with people that are that have already successfully tackled nitrogen pollution in their region, or you can get involved and get into contact and tap into networks of people that are already kind of working on this, or you can even share your own kind of story related to nitrogen pollution. We have a promotional video. It's available on this website if you plan to watch it now. So all of this was sort of leading up to then, like that was all the early phase proposal, and so now we did put together a phase 2 proposal to actually build the thing that we prototyped for our phase 1 proposal. And so essentially what we're talking about doing is that the nitrogen champions that we've identified in each of these watersheds, where we're talking about getting them together to build a Blue Gap Alliance, where we can pilot with some of these key people that we've identified in the watersheds. We can help develop a curriculum that's kind of similar to what we went through with NSF, but in ways that are relevant for their local context. They'll help us generate some of the stories and the material that's going into the platform that we're also populating with data, and they'll test the effectiveness, help us test some of the effectiveness of the stories. The other component of our phase 2 proposal is then not just like connecting people between watersheds, because we understand sometimes you have like really place-based specific challenges related to nutrient pollution. So the idea was to take something kind of like the nitrogen management consortium, but for regular folks, like not just people that have an interest in a load that they're discharging, but people who maybe are part of the non-point sources of nitrogen pollution to the bay, and get them together and figure out how they can tap into these things and find out what nitrogen pollution means to them, what's relevant, and how they might want to act to make the community better and to reduce nitrogen pollution together in on their own sort of way. So we'll pilot that aspect of taking the alliances work down to an academy and boot camp kind of level, and we'll use that academy to test how the platform works, if it's accessible, if it's useful, those kinds of things. And so the good news is that proposal is recommended for funding. It's actually a fairly significant, like I think $4 million grant with several $100,000 coming to the ESHRI program. It is recommended for funding. And so we expect some of this work to be going on over the course of the next couple of years. Basically, the intent is to humanize nitrogen pollution, build on all the great work, not just of the Nitrogen Management Consortium, but also of what we've learned about like the Deep Learning campaign and behavior change, and how we can make these things accessible to the 3.2 million people who live here more broadly, and also pick up good lessons learned from these other places along the way. So that's what the Blue Gap project is, and I'm happy to answer any questions you all have.
You guys found when you talked today, that all the challenges are dealing with the temperature and rainfall changes, and just surviving and obviously doing that. Are you more receptive or less receptive?
So the farmers, we talked to the most farmers in Iowa, and in Iowa, they acknowledge changes both in rainfall and in temperature. But they still all said that the majority of their choices in terms of when to apply fertilizer or whether or not to support things like cover crops had more to do with pricing. So like when the futures for fertilizer were going through the roof, everyone applied in the late fall, which is not a great time to apply there. But they did it because they wanted to lock in at the lower price. So they were much more interested in talking about price sensitivity and some of the economic issues than the environmental choices that they might need to make. We did talk to a number of farmers who, like, there's one county where farmers have sort of like they have, you know, they're still small scale, they're not large corporate farms, and they're like, you know, 6th generation farmers, their daddies knew their daddies, and they have, they're practicing regenerative farming and using cover crops and doing other things like that. But those choices were, it's from what they conveyed to us, were more about like a love of place and then social norms, like they were applying pressure to each other to do the right thing because this was like the county that they left, and not so much about like responding to any kinds of changing conditions like that. The one exception I would say is there's a guy, Mitch Fora, that we talked to, and Mitch is kind of like a superstar in the ag world, and he is very interested in carbon capture and carbon storage on farms, and then learning how to adapt to these different changing climate pressures by using technology. But he's also got a business interest in that. Like that's his, aside from farming, his business is selling like precision water quality, temperature, like rainfall monitoring, like all that equipment that like automates that. That's what he does. So he was the most interested in those kinds of things and adapting in that way. But I think that there was another interest that was also driving that. So here locally, we only talked to the one farmer, and there wasn't really much conversation about, you know, climate pushing his operations like somewhere else or putting them out of business.
And I guess the other question I had is, we've been, you know, really focused on nitrogen, but in some of these other areas, phosphorus, even locally, and there were areas where phosphorus was that part of this project?
Yeah, we've gone back and forth, and like we're trying to like put some bounds on what we were doing, but we certainly talked a lot about phosphorus as well, because it is especially in Iowa part of the challenges there. So I think we sort of talked about those things, and there might be lessons that are like learned or applicable, or some of those data could be shared on the platform, but it's not the focus. We have tried to target specifically on nitrogen and nitrates.
So the Mississippi watershed is huge, and then you look at like our little Tampa Bay area compared to that. So are you looking at this information being able to be shared beyond Tampa Bay and other like areas that have the nitrogen thing? Like what is the ultimate goal to be able to expand beyond like your watersheds that you've identified in the initial part of this?
Yeah, so we're trying to figure out messages that sort of relate and approaches that can be replicated elsewhere. So some of the ideas that, you know, perhaps the other national estuary programs throughout the country might be interested if we find that there is something that translates between our watershed to their watershed. But I think we're trying to be true to the fact that nutrient pollution is really place specific, that there are some universal lessons that we've learned, but then there are, things that are really kind of local and need to be dealt with in a local way that are addressing like what the local sources are, what the local culture is. And so we're trying to approach it differently, finding out like which pieces are transferable and which pieces like need to kind of stay place-based. So we're, yes, the idea is that we can find those pieces that are transferable and take them elsewhere. A lot of the reason that we're kind of talking about these things and some of my skepticism going into it is that, like these culture exchanges between like Louisiana, fisher folk and farmers in Iowa have gone on for a long time. And pretty much everyone that you talk to, like academically, they'll say, oh, that's a great idea. And then you talk to the people that are part of it and they roll their eyes like pretty darn hard because they don't really care that much about like what the other is experiencing. And so we're not trying to like make Iowa feel bad about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. That's not one of our talking points at all. That's why I said like these themes that we're kind of pulling on are about the economy and human health. And specifically in Iowa, we're trying to get people to stop hiding from talking about the safety of their drinking water. And we think that people are more likely, people that don't have like an obvious passion, like maybe some of us do, they will care about one of those two things. And that there will be some way to make those pieces, those kinds of stories, make this invisible pollutant like more on people's radar again. So, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, in the Virgin Islands, what was the main source of nitrogen?
I didn't actually get to go on that trip. I know, it was an IQ test and I failed. It was actually like they went, that trip actually came on the heels of basis. It was like that fall. So I couldn't make that one. But that, I'm not sure is the long and short. But my understanding, what's been conveyed back to me is that the main discussion was around education and people engaging in nutrient, like talking about nitrogen pollution, like stuff that's I think maybe more relatable here because of their proximity to the water. It's much easier for us to care about like fishing in Tampa Bay. So we'll work on nutrient pollution because like those things are really close to us in our way of like they're going out on the reef or like that's how they're feeding their family and having fun. So they have that same connection, whereas we had to think differently in Iowa. So it was mostly about like the educational components, what I heard back. I didn't hear much back from like technical folks. And I believe that there is a dearth of data there. They don't have a lot of information in terms of, the ambient water quality and what might be contributing to those sources. Other than like the usual suspects that we might expect, but yeah. Aaron.
Well, I think this sounds like a great project and congrats on the recommendation for funding. Beyond the website, what's the strategy for getting these kind of brand ambassadors that you have for nitrogen management kind of out there having more of these conversations? Do you have that budgeted that they're going to be talking?
We do. I didn't actually talk too much about that, but that's what Tierra Moore is going to be working on. And for those of you who don't know, I guess I've kind of buried the lead. Like a lot of this is we're trying to work in what our research shows they prefer to be called frontline communities, not disadvantaged or underserved. So primarily Black and brown communities that sometimes people don't always affiliate with nitrogen pollution. But Tierra Moore is the CEO and founder of Black and Marine Science. And she was able to build a really large following using social media channels and creating a network of other Black marine scientists. And she features their work. She does like kind of similar things by featuring these things on BIMS Bites, where people basically like break down their science in quick and accessible videos. And so she's going to be working to develop all of the social media platforms, the TikTok, the Instagram, all that stuff, the YouTube channel, all the videos that go along with it, and we'll also be developing a documentary. So we do have, we have people and budget. That's actually some of the most significant part of our budget is on developing out like who those influential voices would be and how we collect those stories and then share them broadly.
Any additional questions from our end? Last discussion item is State of the Bay.
Do you want to let Joe drive or do you want to drive?
I would like to. All good on that end, Ed? Yeah. Cool. All right. Good morning, everyone. Like mentioned in the agenda, I'm going to talk quickly about the State of the Bay report. We're really excited to have released that. Everyone should see at their seat that you have a printed version of the report. So for anyone who might be unfamiliar, the State of the Bay report is building on an effort that we have every 3 years to report on the successes, challenges, and accomplishments of our program and its partners. So this is the report capturing the time period from 2019 to 2021. So like I said, really excited to have that officially released. Although you have a printed publication in front of you, this publication also comes in a digital format as well as the living, routinely updated website that you can see on the screen right now. And so this website was actually revised fairly recently with the help of Marcus Beck to include these, like I said, routinely updated sections here. And so they're broken up by our key priorities, which is, of course, clean waters and sediments, thriving habitats and abundant wildlife, informed, engaged, responsible community. And so the printed publication in front of you also follows that same outline. And then underneath all of those umbrellas are the different subcategories that showcase all of the projects that help to, the reader visualize what those priorities actually include. And so, moral of that story is the printed publication and this living webpage that's updated. The goal really moving forward and the goal that we tried to move closer to with this release was to make those mirror each other as much as possible. So you notice that the document includes a lot of the same graphics that are available on these web pages and just expands a little bit in the copy and the narrative that we're hoping to, again, feed back into the website so that moving forward, there is a little bit more mirroring going on. So in the printed document itself, you'll notice that there are key section pages for each section, or rather intro pages for each section, which really distill the key successes and challenges. So that was a new thing that we added that was not in the previous State of the Bay edition, in an attempt again to kind of summarize everything in one place so that people can really flip to that, get the main idea. If we've only got 20 seconds of their attention, hopefully we can get some of our points across there. So we're excited to see that happen, or to see that included. And so other major updates include what I'd like to show you on the webpage here is this reach index. And so kind of keeping in mind the communications plan that I've presented to everyone here in the past, the reach index is really an effort of ours to showcase some of that work that we're trying to complete through the communications plan. That's including consistency in branding, our social media reach, how loud we're getting, and other platforms that we've been using, some more innovative ones like Reddit, and tracking the news press that we've been involved in. So in the printed publication, it kind of expands on this a little bit more than what's on the website. You can see that we've really put some effort into showcasing what our reach looks like and what is happening on all of those different platforms. And so this section of the webpage, we're hoping to continue to expand on and just continue to do a better job of showcasing what that reach looks like and what are some trends we can see, what is some content that's really delivering for us. And so that's one of the cool updates that I wanted to mention, but another great one that we tried to move towards with this release is providing the assets that we're using, not only internally among the staff so that everyone has access to those and they can use them and it's easier to create presentations, but also to any of our partners that want to help us promote certain projects or certain research that they want to showcase. All of these are available as downloadable PNGs, high quality, so people can download them, throw them in their presentation, and it's basically everything that's available in the report itself. And so this wasn't something that we did in the past. I think it's really cool to include this stuff now, and I'd like to continue doing that. And really what that relationship looks like is me working with Marcus to make sure that we're producing or we're making available all of the assets that he's able to produce on his dashboards and things like that. And again, if I didn't mention this, the report is available as a digital download, and the physical copy is available too. Not that I think anyone's going to go print it, but we've got some of those printed for you here anyways. We've also got extra in the back if anyone needed them. Also, I wanted to mention that this is something that a little different from last time. We designed this in-house, which was a pretty big project for myself, so I'm really appreciative of that opportunity. And I think I learned a lot of new skills that are going to lend themselves to more collaboration between Marcus and myself, and of course the rest of the staff, so that we can pump out these data visualization assets and make them more available in the future, and really just improve upon that for any upcoming publications that we might have. And again, figuring out how to balance, something that I've really learned with this process is figuring out how to balance when we can use contractual support to help us produce these things, and when we could do some of this stuff in-house. Just to kind of manage that workload and get these publications out quicker. So last thing I kind of want to leave everyone with is, how can all of you help us share this moving forward? Our goal, I think the main priority right now is to create a presentation that really comprehensively showcases everything that's in this report, but distills it in an easily digestible manner, mainly for the staff to use, so that they can go out, give those presentations, building on some of the presentations they've already given. Making that available and kind of adding that to this sort of content kit that we're trying to build, the assets, the presentations, things like that. So really people can take this content, go and present on it. But once that presentation's created, that's also something that's going to be a good resource for all of y'all to help us tell this story. And all of these assets that I've mentioned that are available, that's really the goal of them, is making them available to you, so that if you needed them to share in your own presentations, you can share them, and they're going to follow the consistent branding that TVAP uses. So any sharing that y'all can do would be obviously much appreciated. And like I said, there's more copies available in the back. And moving forward, we're just going to continue to promote this via our social media channels. We've got some potential press lined up to highlight it, and of course, like our newsletters and other platforms like that. We're going to try to put out little bite-sized pieces of it as we move along. I'd be happy to take any questions.
And if you all had any requests or, what would help you sort of share this information to as ESHRE program ambassadors, we would welcome hearing what would actually help you to get that message out.
Just add my thanks to Joe and staff for helping put this together. Key takeaways from this latest report that I'm sort of synthesizing in my mind and part of the presentation, but that we've had some great progress in the region in terms of water quality. But this last report really represented a check in that progress. We have some issues that we need to address in Upper Tampa Bay in terms of water quality issues, loss of seagrass, that we're directing resources as a community and collective to deal with the resources that are affecting water quality conditions. And in particular, too, the Habitat Master Plan update during this reporting period highlights the need to capitalize on opportunities that remain within the watershed to restore habitats, critical coastal habitats across the gamut, from in-bay habitats like seagrasses, flat habitats, all the way up to our watershed and freshwater wetlands and native upland habitats. So again, highlighting the fact that we're having diminishing opportunities for those restoration opportunities in the watershed. We need to capitalize on them to meet those 2030, longer 2050 goals. And lastly, because of some of the conditions that we've experienced in the Bay that have been used to, the Bay, as I mentioned, is not in its prime condition right now. There's been a large community collective rallying around trying to get the Bay back on track. Do that is positive. It building on not only the work that Maya is developing through USF and the other partners, but building that community collective for a clean and healthy Tampa Bay moving forward, and really directing resources for projects that have significant bang for buck in terms of reversing the course of what we were seeing lately. So again, I think those are the sort of takeaways that will distill even more into the presentation Joe mentioned. But these platforms, both the digital platform, the printed publication platform, we want to use as vehicles to further educate, increase awareness on issues facing Tampa Bay. So please take some, distribute amongst your colleagues, and if there are assets that are available digitally now, help tell the story on the need to get Tampa Bay back on track. We'll be happy to work with partners to further develop this. So again, just want to thank staff for working on this and bringing this to fruition this year. And in the future, these digital assets will be more readily updatable on a year-to-year basis. Will be not stale, sitting on a shelf, becoming old. We'll be having active data updates as we receive those from partners. So just wanted to provide that additional information, and thanks to staff and you all for being part of the collective process to collect that information that goes to the state.
Thanks, Ed.
I'd like to say this looks really nice. Very nice. Well, super nice to the program.
Thank you.
Additional feedback? Okay, so there's extras back there.
Yeah, we've got more than just on the table, what's on the table there, so please take a lot of them.
If you have like public lobbies and you'd
Yeah.
like to display them, we would love to provide them to you. Just let us know.
It's about 50 in that box over there, so it's a good amount.
Sure, you put the good.
I'm gonna unshare.
No, he's already sharing.
Oh, we're good.
Mine has the last agenda item, the quarterly progress reports.
So the quarterly progress reports are contained, there's a screenshot from the Smartsheet dashboard that shows you where each of our individual projects are at in terms of financials, and then there are usually some comments and notes. All of the points are clickable, so you can go into our Smartsheet and see where each project is. The next meeting is November 4th.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, and this goes for the question that Leanne asked earlier. So if you look at this dashboard, at any one time, we're a little over $14 million worth of projects, but in a fiscal year, we're not expending these sorts of projects. They're usually multi-year projects that span sometimes 5 years or less. So that's why you'll see some sort of carryover from year to year.
So before we end the meeting, I just want to share a couple items and if anybody else wants to share. I did want to make everyone aware that our solid waste department is applying for a NOAA grant with regard to the reefs, including one in Tampa Bay, where we have tire issues. You know, back in the day, somebody tires was a good idea for artificial things. You know, much better now. Anyway, NOAA has quite a bit of money out there for restoration of those types of legacy issues on reefs. And so our solid waste department is putting in a great application for that. I just also, as we were talking about nitrogen, wanted to make sure that the statewide stormwater rule is on everybody's radar. I sat as a representative of the Florida Stormwater Association on the statewide TAC. A report came out of that group. There is a draft rule. It does significantly deviate from what the TAC recommended in some areas. For new development, there are significant nutrient flow reduction requirements, much higher than the folks are going to be comfortable with. On the redevelopment side, they lowered it down to too much, they went too far, and especially with nitrogen. So I brought it up, and the Florida Stormwater Association submitted formal comments. You want to see those comments, we do have a working group that's kind of focused on it and then staying ahead of it, but need to keep the phosphorus reductions high, which in some areas is fine. Pointing out areas where phosphorus is a problem, but in coastal communities where nitrogen tends to drive things, those reductions are going too far, they're going down too low. And given how long these rules will stay in place, and we're talking about the impact of stormwater, I think the community should stay really involved in that and abreast of what's going on. There's traffic out there, and they are expecting it to kind of move forward after the election. Anyone else have anything they want to share?
Just want to mention the district software training initiative. The program is open, you can application. Applications are due the first Friday in October, and I also want to mention there have been some significant changes in the program. There's a workshop available online if you want to look at it and do that. A application, I recommend going back and watching it. I don't know for design and permitting could potentially be part of the match in for projects. So previously it was not our years, so we're changing that a bit. That's 10% of the total project cost. Third party review for construction projects for $5 million will still be a requirement. So we all the applicant to have that done before they submit the application. And again, that cost is used as part of the match. That's 10% of the cost. And we've been messaging that the cycle can be very competitive. Some of the numbers that we're doing, and they were very in that meeting, the workshop, is about 2 to 5 million for each project, which is a significant reduction from previous years. And it isn't that we're spending less on CFI, we're actually spending the most we've ever spent. It's there's other projects now. So the funding is going to go to those projects. Now they are applying, those projects are applying for federal funds, infrastructure funds, and if successful, could change the 2 to 5 million. So we're not encouraging anybody from applying for CFI, just taking it for it is competitive. And I think there's some on the math system side, quality side, there's the minimum to be matched with one application. Consider for 50 pounds of nitrogen, for water quality, for kind of more regional projects, larger projects, and 400 for soil restoration. So I think that the workshop will point out some of the changes in the program, the guidelines are available, and I'm available for next questions. Nancy wants me, one of our engineers for water quality, all of that information is available online. You're welcome to contact me about it. Thank you.
Question. There was a meeting, I think, where they were kind of talking about, it was one of the work meetings where they were talking about, what you were saying, some of the bigger projects maybe getting a lot of funding. But there was also a statement made that was untrue, that there's like stormwater money available for PDP, and then that was that local governments could go after that money. That was just that's not true. They're not funding like water quality treatment projects. So I was just concerned that it made it sound like to the board that there were these other resources that local governments could go to for water quality projects in lieu of CFI and that concern.
I can't speak to the DEP projects or funding specifically, but I can say is they do have a water quality grant. I wouldn't know the specifics of it.
Yeah, quality restoration type project, but that's not really what we're getting at. But I wanted to make sure that the communication on what DEP is funding and what management is funding, that there's some knowledge there, because I don't know, the way it came off at that meeting was that it's almost like local governments don't need to apply for us because they go to DEP, and that's not the case. And I don't want that for a local government applying for a project and then have a board member say, well, we heard that they can apply for DEP money, but it's not.
I guess, like I said, I can't speak to the program specifically. There are two grants that I'm aware of that allow for water quality type projects. I think we speak to the specifics of it. I'm not that familiar with the grants on that side. But in addition to those, there are the federal funds as well. So I think the point is just to be aware that it is going to be applied. There are other funding sources. You don't just apply for those to rebuild it.
Yeah, I just got an email that there's a Resilient Florida program live Q&A.
Yeah, we're applying, but again, it's not apples to apples. It's not like we can apply for like something that we're doing that's more, restoration, water quality, typical things that we would apply for CFI. They're different. The things that they're funding are different, and it just seemed that there was and that was stated at that meeting, that there was just a misunderstanding and not truly understanding, what he's funding and what they're not. And they have very limited funding too. It's not like they have $30 million. So I think there's a lot of assumptions out there about the funding sources that probably needs to be developed. I just don't want to hear from our side of that board that, well, you guys need to go fund district. We already do that. Give me permission.
Just to add that, I think, based on this, you can skip the reduction in the upper part that we're going to have band together as a community at federal, state, local level, fund significant projects that address nutrient pollution, primarily stormwater. So regardless of the funding source, there needs to be targeted and concerted efforts by all partners to seek out the necessary funding to continue with production projects, not only in the areas where we're having issues, but all throughout the Tampa Bay watershed. It's 3.1 million people in the watershed now. It's not going to go down in the next 10 or several decades. So these are going to be vexing issues that we're going to have to deal with collectively as a community. Now is the opportunity to see the funding sources that are coming down the region to implement projects that will have long-term benefits on the base water quality. And the SRA program can help in that respect. We're trying to direct resources we have towards those projects, but we also want to encourage partners in the industry to be active participants in seeking out those funds to address nutrient pollution. That's my soliloquy for that issue, but very grateful that these funding resources from the district, DEP, are now available. We just need to capitalize on them. I did have one notification as well. I'm participating as part of the Ocean Conservancy panel at St. Pete College STEM Center on August 24th from 6 to 8. Kate Hubbard, Peter Clark, Tampa Bay Watch, and Ocean Conservancy members, kind of talking through the latest issues we're facing in Tampa Bay surrounding loss of seagrasses, water quality conditions in Upper Bay, higher digging in Tampa Bay, and what we need to do, as I mentioned, as a community collective to start addressing those issues. So if you have the time, I think that it's going to be streamed virtually as well. There'll be some additional links on our website. But
Seeing none, thank you for making my first meeting as chair painless. We are adjourned.